All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Natalie Henderson. I'm the CEO of Applerouth and very privileged to moderate tonight's panel, which is the second of our Path to College events. And want to introduce you to our speakers tonight. Dana Messenger is the Dean of College Guidance at the Ramaz School. She's been the Dean of College Guidance at Ramaz since 2019. And before going to the high school side, she had a long career in admissions on the university side at a variety of institutions, including Johns Hopkins, Baruch College, Columbia Law School, and the New School. So we're very honored to have Dana giving her time here tonight to give you all high quality information about this college process. And then we, of course, also have Jed Applerouth, who is the founder and president of Applerouth Education. Jed has been working in this world of test prep and admissions for more than 20 years. He founded Applerouth. He's also got his counseling degree and a PhD in educational psychology, and is widely regarded as an expert around all things admission and test prep. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the second of our Path to College events. Hopefully, if you have a freshman, you joined us on May 10th. If not, we're happy to send you the recording. And if you have a junior who's will be a rising senior, I hope that you'll join us next week on May 24th as we talk about what that class needs to know heading into their summer before senior year. All right. At Applerouth, we do this work because we believe that if you can change a student's self-beliefs, you can change their lives. And that looks a variety of different ways. And one of the things that I think we're privileged to do is offer webinars like this so that we can get good, high quality information out in the community free of charge. We also offer services. Obviously, we do academic tutoring, test prep, and executive function coaching. So if those are things that feel like they would be helpful, absolutely reach out. We'd be happy to help you. All right. And with that, I am going to tell you where we're going tonight and then pass it off to Dana, who's going to get us started. So Dana is going to run us through for about 20 minutes a roadmap of what 10th graders need to know. So the second half of high school, what do you need to know? Jed is going to talk to us about standardized testing options and kind of the unique position that your students are in as the digital SAT will be coming this coming year. We'll do a quick poll just because it helps us to know who's here, and then spend the last 20 minutes or so doing Q&A. Some of you submitted questions ahead of time. I have those. And we will be going through them, but also there's a Q&A box at the bottom. Feel free to pop your questions into that Q&A box at any time. I may not ask it exactly the way that you phrase it because I may anonymize it a little bit or generalize it a little bit so that it'll apply to others as well. But we will try and cover as many of those questions as we can. All right, Dana?
Hi, thank you all for having me here. I wish I could see you in person, maybe someday. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what you need to think about over the next 2 years, and some of it will be forward into senior year, but I really want to start with this next year especially. We, at Ramaz, when I work with students, we don't work backwards from, what do colleges want to see when you apply to college, right? Colleges don't care what students major in, what their activities are, right? They don't have one major on their campus. They have a variety. They don't have one club. They have a variety of clubs. So we work with students to help them identify their academic passions and their interests. And from there, right, they express those to colleges, not the other way around. So at this point, if students don't know what they love in school, outside of school, it's really important that they start to think about what they want to do over the next 2 years and in college and how to express that. And that really starts with the foundation, and that is developing strong study and organizational skills. So if students struggle with note taking, preparing sheets for tests, organizing projects, it's really important to get them help or to have teachers that can assist them. If you have a student who gets A's without taking a single note in class, that makes me crazy, because what happens is the work gets harder, right? Senior year, you're taking IB, AP, honors level classes, then you move on to college, you move on to upper level college courses. And if you don't practice those note-taking skills, those study skills, if you don't think about how to plan a semester-long paper so that you're not doing it all in the last 2 days, you're really going to struggle as a student moves through their academic career. So that's the foundation. And it's really important for students to, it's like a muscle memory. It's like running, right? Like you can't run a half marathon if you don't practice. And these students really need to be practicing their organizational and study skills. But as they think about what they want to study in college, how they want to present themselves, It begins in the classroom, and we encourage our students, I encourage you on this call, to be engaged learners. So in the classroom, that means raising your hand, asking questions. If you find something interesting the teacher says, you can talk to them after class about it. You can ask for additional readings if something really strikes your fancy. Teachers choose to be in the classroom with students because they want to engage. They want to spark passion and curiosity in students. And so they're always happy to talk with students after class and to help them learn more. And then if a student finds something that they love, right, explore that passion outside of the classroom. And that can be summer programs, extracurricular activities. It can be reading, right? If your student loves to read, they want to major in literature or English, an activity is reading all of the works of Ibsen, or reading, sci-fi and writing your own sci-fi story, right? Like, take that learning outside of the classroom. Colleges are really excited when they see students' passion spill over from the classroom and into the community and into the school. As you're thinking right now, 11th, 12th grade, about the transcript as you're applying to colleges, you want to consider whether your curriculum and your academic trajectory lines up with what you want to study in college and what your goals are. So if a student wants to be an engineer, but they're not on track to take calculus, probably not a good fit for applying to college. A student wants to be pre-med, right? They want to be STEM, but science is their weakest subject. Not a great choice then for applying to college. I mean, the thing that students can think about when they start to play the admissions game is that most schools, although you apply for a major, you come in undecided. So if you want to be pre-med, you're applying to the College of Arts and Sciences typically, and you can choose a different major and then study either the courses you need to apply to med school or switch to biology once you get there. There are some limitations. Universities may have different schools, like the School of Engineering, Arts and Sciences, the business school, and it may be hard to move between those. But just think a little bit about how that transcript reflects what your ultimate goals are and whether you need to either push yourself to learn math over the summer so that you can be in calculus and you can apply to an engineering program, or maybe shift what your goals are to be more in line with your strengths. I get the question a lot whether grades are more important than rigor, right? Which is the most important. And if you're thinking about the most competitive colleges, the Ivies, the Ivy Pluses, the answer is yes, both. But at most schools, that's not necessarily the case. What I've actually found is that the grades are more important than the rigor. So at Ramon's, we have general studies, accelerated, and honors, right? It's 3 tiers. It's different at different schools, but usually it's a tiered system. And to be honest, the students who get all A's and accelerated do better than the students that get mostly B's in the honors curriculum. So you want to challenge yourself. And if your student gets an A minus, do not pull them out of that honors class. That is not the lesson you should take away from tonight. But if you're getting C's and B's in the most rigorous courses, you may want to think at this moment about stepping back a little bit. It may not be the best match for your student. It doesn't mean that if a student is absolutely passionate about science, wants to be in that one honors course, it's not their best class, but they really enjoy it, fine. There's nothing wrong with staying in one honors class, but on that question of whether it's better to get all A's in a lower level track or all B's on the upper level track, it's honestly better to get the A's. The grades do matter, and colleges think about grade trends. So you want your grades to be going up, not going down. I mean, if you're a strong student, you want them to remain the same. But if you had a weak freshman year and you've been building up, you want to continue on that path. The next thing that colleges really think about, and it's important for students to think about now, are extracurricular activities. College is not just about going to class. College is a living, learning community. You are in the dorms, you are in clubs and organizations. The reason why it's so much fun to go visit a college campus and see everybody doing 1,000 activities and everyone's friends is because colleges intentionally select students that are going to come and contribute to their community, not just their classroom. And the way they select students is by or create a class like that is by selecting the students who are engaged in high school. You can be engaged in your clubs at school, you can be engaged in your community, you can have a job. If you are caring for a relative, younger siblings, or a grandparent, that is an activity. But if your student is not involved, now is the time to get involved. They really need to join some clubs and organizations. And if they are involved, they should stay involved because 11th and 12th grade is where there are opportunities for leadership. Colleges do not expect students to be a leader of every single club they are a member of, but they do want them to contribute in meaningful ways. So depth is much more important than breadth. And if you've been in a club for 2 years, even if you're not the president in your junior year or the vice president, can you lead one of the sessions or bring in a speaker or come up with an idea or be the fundraiser for an activity, right? Something where you're actually contributing leadership in a different way, even without the title. Um, it's the more selective college, the more important this is, as I said. It does not always have to line up with your major of interest, right? So you can be someone who loves dance and you want to major in psychology. That is fine. You don't have to say like everything needs to point to my major, but there are some places where you want to think about whether your activities are lining up with what you want to do. So if you want to be a writer, you want to be an English major, you should be writing outside of the classroom, not just, in the class. You do well in English class? Okay, join the literary magazine. Um, you know, write for the newspaper, write for yourself and self-publish or have a blog, right? You want to be writing. If you want to be an engineer, it's hard to join an electrical engineering club, but you could join robotics, coding, math club, physics club. So you do sometimes want your activities to line up with your area of interest, but they don't all have to. And you'll see when you get to that point in time where you're filling out the Common App that there are 10 activities listed. You do not need to fill all 10 in. So, if you've got 6 really substantive activities, don't become a member and go to a bunch of 1-hour lunch meetings for 10 weeks in the year just to fill out that list. That's not what colleges are looking for. They're really looking for that depth, that commitment. How do you shape the community that you're a part of and change it in a positive way? So really think about, again, staying involved or getting involved if you don't feel like you really have that much involvement. And the summer is an excellent time to get involved. It's an excellent time to explore 1 or 2 of your passions without the stress of the school year. For STEM students, as I said, it's very hard for engineers to know what engineering looks like because we don't teach classes in chemical engineering, but you can do summer programs that focus on specific kinds of engineering. I will say that for those STEM students who have the ambitions of going to Ivy plus colleges, so those highly rejectives, the top 10 or 15, the ultimate activity that you can be involved in is lab-based research, so university research. There are some summer programs that have university research. The Garcia program, BU Rise come to mind. There are others. They tend to have early deadlines, so it's something that probably in December, January, February of next year, you'll be applying to for the following summer. But we have students at Ramaz who send emails to professors looking for research in their lab, and they get a lot of no's, but they also will get 1 or 2 yeses, and all you need is 1. So it takes a little bit of legwork, but if you have a university in your area, colleges do allow high school students into their labs. And again, for STEM-based students, research is the ultimate activity that colleges are looking for, especially those highly selective colleges. Internships can also be incredibly valuable, but the work is more important than the name. So working at Google, but getting coffee and making copies is not nearly as impressive to a college as doing the social media or writing code for a startup company. If your student is interested in government, history, or politics, get involved in a campaign this summer or next. We are in an election cycle. It can be local, statewide, national. I will tell you that this is the kind of thing where you show up, you volunteer, you may be making copies that first day, but if the student is proactive, if they're excited, they're engaged, they are showing up regularly, they will give them as much responsibility as the student is capable of handling. And it's a really great experience. A lot of students will also do campus-based programs. I will just say, for engineers, I think actually those campus-based programs are valuable because again, it's hard to know what you really want to do as an engineer, but they're expensive. They tend to be like $4,000 or $5,000. And I don't think that doing a 2-week course on political science is as valuable as interning at a campaign, if that's what you want to study. And colleges don't care that you did the course at their school. There are some very rare exceptions to this, but when I worked at Hopkins, the number of people that would say like, oh, I did CTY over the summer and expect me to like light up. Hopkins doesn't care. Hopkins doesn't care that you did C2I. They care that you did a summer program that lines up with your interests, but it's not the ultimate in terms of summer activities, and they are very expensive. Don't do them if they're expensive and online, though. Just my personal opinion. And there are free online classes. Coursera and WebEx offer free courses. I've had students who are interested in things like sports management do free summer classes. I'd say do one. You don't want to spend your entire summer in front of a screen that doesn't set you up for success for the following year. But okay, we're on the next slide. But yeah,
No,
so
wait, Dana, before you go to the next slide, we did have one question come in. We're going to hold most of the questions to the end, but this one was just somebody wanted, can you repeat the research programs that you mentioned?
So the Garcia program, I think it's run through Stony Brook, BU Rise, Boston University Rise program. I think there are a few others. It's if you've got a STEM kid, now these are very competitive programs. If you've got a STEM kid, research these programs now, be prepared to apply early. You'll need a letter of rec from a science teacher. Great programs. They're very competitive. And at the same time, you should be also looking for lab-based research. You can do both. So in terms of the college process, it's entirely too early to create a list, partly because your student is still growing academically and intellectually, but also because the colleges you're applying to will be informed by junior year grades, right? Your overall GPA and testing if you're applying with testing. But it's not too early to think about colleges. And what I talk to students about now is thinking about the types of colleges they are interested in. And you can do that by incorporating college visits into travel. You can certainly visit over the summer. I will say that you get less information over the summer because there aren't students there, or not as many. You can't go into the dining hall. You can't see all the students on the quad and feel the vibe. So if a student loves a college they visit over the summer, this summer, it's a good idea to go back in the spring or fall of your junior or senior year. But as you travel next year, you're visiting family, you're going on a family vacation, incorporating college visits into this travel, I think will really help students. And I tell people to focus on types of schools. There are certain characteristics that really inform the college experience, and you can include or exclude whole categories based on the types of schools you like. Size is one of them. Do you want to go to a 30,000 person school, or do you want a mid-size, 7 to 10,000, or a small liberal arts with 2,000 students, right? If you visit University of Maryland because you're visiting the DC area and it's overwhelmingly large, probably should cross off those other big state schools. Think about location, not just how far from home it is or which coast it's on, but how close to a city it is. Students sometimes, want to be near a city, but they want a real campus. Like, that's a valid feeling. So, just walking around campus can give students a sense of what they're looking for in a location. Colleges have different requirements. So some schools like Columbia and Chicago have this great books curriculum and all the students take it. Some students love that. Other students just want to study what they want to study. So understanding how that impacts your academic experience. How easy is it to get internships or research? Some schools even have co-op programs where you work for a semester. Does that appeal to you? Does that not matter at all? There's something called a rah-rah, I call it the rah-rah factor. And it tends to be these like D1 schools. So I worked with sisters. I helped the older sister get into Emory, loves it, could be the ambassador for the school, but it's not a rah-rah school. And so when the younger sister talks about the older one, she's like, yeah, all of her friends love it, but they don't like chant, She's like, I want to go to a school where they chant, and that's fine. It's all of these things are about fit, right? It's the fit for the older sister, not for the younger sister. So understanding what kind of vibe you want in college can really help you narrow that search as you get into your junior and senior year. The other really important thing to think about now is what your family's budget is. So college, a private college without any aid is $85,000 a year, probably more by the time you apply, maybe upwards of 90. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the sticker price, that's going to be the cost for you. Colleges do offer need-based aid, and some colleges offer merit-based aid. But it is important for families to think of what their budget is. What are they willing to spend on college? Often parents will say, well, make it work, we'll make it work. And then they get the bill, right, along with the acceptance letter, and it's just not feasible. It is not a good idea, in my opinion, to take out $100,000 of private loans. Federal loans, I think, are fine. Those are manageable. The rate is manageable. But taking out huge sums of private loans on top of that really limits students in tremendous ways after they graduate in terms of jobs, home ownership. So think about what your family is willing to pay and limit the schools based on that. You can use FAFSA, you can use online, the aid calculators of different schools to understand what your actual costs will be. You can contact financial aid offices if you have questions. They're always willing to talk to prospective students, but you will save yourself and your students a lot of heartache if you just determine what your budget is now and work within that budget. And then these are just some things to think about going forward, and certainly in senior year. So college admissions officers will read an application. They'll read, 30, 40 applications in a day, and they'll write 1 or 2 sentences about the student. And every piece of your application drives to this story. So the letters of recommendation, the transcript, the testing, the letters of recommendation, the extracurricular activities, your essays, and you want each piece to tell a piece of your story that drives to a single narrative. And it's good to think about what that narrative is and not just kind of like have it be haphazard. So when you're thinking about your narrative, you want to think about whether a student has unique interests or activities. If a student is interning at a museum over the summer, might be a good idea to apply as an art history major to a college, right? That's a pretty unique activity. Most people don't intern at art museums as a student. That tends to be a very small major. Lean into those sort of unique interests of a student. Think about, how to express interest in a different way, right? So at Ramaz, like the number of times students have said, "Oh, I'm interested in business and I sell sneakers and I make a lot of money." It's like my eyes glaze over. I mean, what like I just hear it all the time and you're like, "Uh-huh, great." And if I hear it all the time at a small private school, I guarantee you it's like in every essay for every business application. But there are lots of ways to have an interest in business that are different than that. So help your student think about, how to express the interest in the non-standard way. I always encourage students to not to apply for the school's most popular major. So, at Hopkins, probably half the application pool wants to major in biology and be a doctor. And I bet about 8% of the class is a biology major. So the filter on that is incredibly small. It's very hard to get in for that program. Hopkins has an amazing creative writing program, and it's much easier to get into as a humanities student. Now, the takeaway shouldn't be, I want to be a doctor, I will apply as a writing student. Your application has to fit that narrative. The student has to actually be a writer and do activities outside of the classroom that involve writing. If everything is, all the honors courses are STEM and the kids in like 6 different pre-med clubs, they're not going to believe you. But applying to Chicago for economics, it's hard. Might be easier at some other schools. So think about how to position yourself as not in the most popular major. Teacher letters are very important. So I mentioned that you should participate in class. You should participate in all classes. It helps you be engaged and do better in the class, but it also results in better letters of recommendation. I also recommend to students that when they ask for letters of recommendation, they provide some information to teachers. So you can provide them anecdotes, the time you helped a student in class, the assignment you're most proud of, a conversation you had with a teacher outside of class that was really meaningful to you, your favorite unit that you learned in the class. Like the more details you can give to a teacher, the more specific the letter is going to be. A letter that says the student showed up every day on time, handed in the homework, and got an A in class doesn't tell the college a whole lot. But if you provide additional details to the teacher, it really helps them write a specific letter, and that can help the student stand out in the pool. The other thing, the last piece is to utilize your college office. If you go to a school where the caseload is, 50, 60 students or less, your college advisor is there for you. Use them with the list, with the essays, with the activity section. I mean, we are incredibly hands-on at Vermont, very high touch. Not every student goes to a school for a small number of students. So some guidance counselors are responsible for 500 students, 600 students. And there, while you can utilize them, there are other resources at the school to help you. The essays are very important. And I think English teachers are a really good resource for essay writing. I would not ask 6 English teachers about your essay. Too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes result in that muddled essay. But if you've got a teacher that knows you, ask them to read your personal statement and see if it's a reflection of you. It should be the best example of your writing, and that English teacher can help you polish it.
Okay.
And I think that's it for my tips. I have
Yeah.
lots of other anecdotes that maybe I'll get them into Q&A.
We'll
Awesome.
definitely
Thank
get
you so
there at
much.
the end. Awesome. Thank you, Dana. All right, I'm gonna take it over for about 20, and then we'll do Q&A. So my piece is testing, and this is the year of change, the year of transition, and so testing is definitely in the zeitgeist, up in the air. It's it's a big story this year. Typically, testing is going to fall after the grades. As Dana mentioned, grades are first, then academic rigor is after grades, and then testing is after that, and then everything else below that. So testing still has a role to play in college admissions. Now, the two tests, the big ones, we have the SAT and the ACT. After the most recent redesign, the SAT has more advanced reading and comprehension. It's a harder level passages and some more advanced like reading skills. The ACT has more advanced math and a more prominent science section, has a separate science section compared to some science narratives baked in. There actually is real science asked on the ACT that you have to know outside of class. All right, the overlap is about 80%. So looking at the two in terms of content, there's a lot of overlap. If I'm prepping for one, I'm prepping for the other. There are nuances, there are some fine tuning, but when you're doing prep for one, you are prepping in many ways for the other. Now, the timelines, you have 7 SATs every calendar year, 7 ACTs every calendar year. That's not changing with digital, but March is when things shift to digital testing and paper goes away. And we'll talk at length about that. So typically, you test when you are a junior in most cases. When you finish Algebra 2, that's the time to, when testing is easy. If you're taking Algebra 2 as a junior, you want to wait until the spring semester. You don't want to take it in the fall if you're in Algebra 2, because there's too much Algebra 2 on both tests. And part of it, trying to look at your schedule and say, where am I the least busy? I may have activities all year long, but this 3-month window is relatively lighter. So that may be a good time for getting a couple tests in. And typically, we see some benefits of kids starting earlier as juniors than waiting to the very end, having a little more of a longer runway. And our experience is waiting until you're a senior. That puts a little more pressure, especially because so many of our kids are applying early somewhere. Almost all of them are early action or ED. And so ideally, next year, when you're juniors, you'll begin to build your testing plan. Now, the big change is we're going digital and we're not going back. That's happening in March. You'll also see the first digital PSAT in October. So that's going to be there in a matter of months. When you come back to school, there it is. The digital PSAT is waiting for you. Now, the timelines in March, all over the world, except for the US, the March test was the first ever digital SAT all around the country. Then there was a May test too. So we had 2 administrations. They've actually gone pretty darn well, pretty clean. We have Applerouth students all over the country, all over the world, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback from our students taking it in Europe and in Asia, other places. Now, the thing about this new SAT, it's adaptive, it's digital and adaptive. So it's going to be a real departure from the current test where everyone has the same number of questions. Students are going to have different tests from each other, and also the test changes based on performance. So the way it works, it's section adaptive. You have a baseline. Everyone gets the same number of questions, easy, medium, and hard. And then if you do relatively well, they're going to move you to a harder module. And if you do relatively not as well, you go to an easier module. That's how the test adapts. So it's baseline, your baseline module for verbal, then the adaptive, 10-minute break, baseline for math, and then the adaptive math, and then you're done. That's it. That's the SAT in a nutshell. Now, it's being administered. Most kids will use your own device, your own laptop, your own tablet, your own Chromebook. You can coordinate to schedule to receive them through the College Board, but the majority of kids we work with, they have a tablet or a laptop and so forth. The Blue Book app is going to be running and it locks out everything else. So you can't surf the net or open anything up. It locks down your screen. And the same application you're going to practice on for the Blue Book app, the practice test will be the same when you take the actual test on. So you can practice starting today. It's available for download right now. And so in advance of the test, if your test is on Saturday, you're going to download the material, everything goes in, it's locked, it's encrypted on like a Thursday. When you walk in there, they give you a code and it unlocks your test. So, and one of the best parts of that is at the test center, you only need good Wi-Fi for literally seconds because the test is already there. And then if the Wi-Fi in the school goes out, doesn't matter, you're not using it until the very, very end. When your test is totally finished, there's a moment when everything is ready and you upload a tiny digital text file with your answers, and that's it. So you need Wi-Fi for seconds on the front end and on the back end, and not at all in the middle. So that really makes it great. If there's not amazing Wi-Fi in the school, it doesn't really matter. That's not really, and that was different during the pandemic when Wi-Fi issue, and also different with the digital ACT, which has been administered internationally for about 4 or 5 years, where it was tied to the Wi-Fi. So this is a better model where it's loading from your computer and it's all locked in. All right, big changes. The test has gotten shorter by a good bit of time. With the break, the total time for administration is 2 hours and 24 minutes. That's awesome. This test used to be over 4 hours. And even the current one, it's 3 hours, 15 minutes, but there's about 30 minutes of entering data for your Scantron, you're bubbling in your letters and bubbling in your school code and all the stuff. There's no bubbling in anymore. And everything you do in advance. So you're doing all the pre-registration at home. So you go in there, you're not spending an hour bubbling things in. That's really great. You have more time to answer questions, which is lovely. It's less about speed. They're combining the reading and writing into one combined verbal section. The reading passages are shorter. They're just one little paragraph and then a question, and then new paragraph. There's no more long form passages. Also, you're gonna have a wider array of topics from different kinds of sciences, technologies, a little poetry. But again, these little mini paragraphs, that's the structure of it. And unlike the current SAT, where you have one section with calculator, one without, going forward, there will always be an embedded Desmos calculator part of the test. You can pull it up, you can hide it. It's always right there in every math section. That's great. So no, less of an emphasis on mental math, on doing long division, which honestly, what's the point of that these days? But now it's all calculators is given, like as we have our phones have those functions on them at all times. The structure is this: you have a 32-minute baseline, then 32-minute adaptive verbal, 10-minute break, 35-minute math, then the adaptive, and then that's it. Total number of questions is 98 questions. That's it. It's pretty short, pretty sweet. Also, embedded, there are a couple experimental questions per module, so 8 total, which to help them pre-test items for the future tests, measuring levels of difficulty, make sure there's no bias, there's right answers, and so forth. All right, the timing, I mentioned the timing. One of the big factors, this is a much shorter test than the current SAT or the ACT, and they also are giving kids a lot more time per question. Here's just one example of that when it comes to the verbal. On the digital SAT, you have 71 seconds per verbal question compared to 44 seconds on the ACT. Similar fashion, you have an hour, you have 95 seconds for a digital math question compared to a flat minute. So it's essentially, you have 60% more time per question on the SAT. It's like having an accommodation, which a lot of people like the speed. It feels less rushed. That's been some of the feedback from our students and students around the world. And in terms of the number of items, it's a more efficient test. By doing this adaptive thing, they can get at the answer faster, because if they're putting you into the harder module, they're not going to have to ask you all the easier questions, which they've realized you're not going to typically miss those because you got so many right on the baseline section. So the test gets more efficient. And so here's an example. On the ACT, you have 115 verbal questions, English and reading, compared to 54 on the digital SAT. That's a big deal. So they can get to the answer faster using adaptive testing. The adaptive methodology is just better. It is a superior way to test kids. And eventually all testing is going to be adaptive over time because it's just a smarter way of doing assessments. There's classical testing theory, which has a bunch of items. And then there's the digital and the adaptive, which is more efficient, so more streamlined. One of the reasons why kids like it. All right, adaptive, we mentioned that it's going to give you a baseline and then it gives you the adaptive section. There is one tweak, which shouldn't matter as much, but they are doing a thing called item response scoring, where different items have different relative weights. which shouldn't matter too much to you right now, but know that if there are 20 items on this test, on this module, this item may count more than this item. And you can never tell, but they've done ample research knowing that if you miss this question, that informs if you know this concept, these concepts, and then therefore it has a little higher weighting. That shouldn't make a difference, but it means they're gonna, it's a departure from the current test where every item counts the same. That's just a little bit of inside baseball there. But the easier and harder modules, that's a big deal. They have a very different level of difficulty. Let me show you a slide, which I think is pretty compelling to understand how this works. So here's the I think a key slide for adaptive testing. The middle, the blue, is the baseline. This is for math. The baseline section that everyone takes, the baseline module. And on this module, you have 2 level 1 easy questions. You have 10 level 2 easy but not as easy questions. You have 7 level 3, and then which are a little harder, and then you have 3 level 4, which are the hard stuff. And that's the shape of the baseline module everyone takes. If I get about 2/3 right, I'm going to the hard module. If I get under 2/3 right, I'm going to the easy module. Now look at the difference. So the easy module still has easy, medium, hard questions, but the balance, the recipe is very different. Level 1, I had 2 questions on the baseline. Now I'm going to have 7 questions for level 1. So much easier trying to figure out how much of the easier content do you know. Level 2 was 10, now it's 9. The level 3 was 7, but now it's down to 5. And the 4, the hard stuff, goes down to only 1 really hard question. So that's the mix I'm getting. I'm still getting a mix, but it's an easier skewed mix. Compare that green section to the red, the hard section. So instead of having 7 level 1 questions, I have 1. The assumption is that those aren't going to be as informative. We're trying to figure out, am I at a 650, a 690, 730? They're asking harder questions. In terms of level 2 questions, I go from 9 down to 4. In terms of level 3, the more hard content, I go from 5 up to 12. And then in terms of the hardest questions, instead of 1, now I have 5. So you can see these are different looking, feeling modules. That's how this test adapt. That's how you go from 140 questions, down to 80. It's by doing this, the adaptation. That's how this works. All right, now students and administrators both seem to prefer the new test. In one of the pilot samples, they had 5,500 kids, and 8 out of 10 kids who had taken the paper and digital said, I like the digital better. And our feedback, we have hundreds of kids who've taken this, our colleagues also in the industry, we've queried our students, and the vast majority seem to like this test. One of the major things is the feedback is it didn't feel as rushed. It was only 2.5 hours all in. I wasn't mentally exhausted at the end, but there's a lot of good things that kids are reporting a better experience. And also it's easier for administrators to administer, there's no scantrons to match up. It's just simpler. There's no time to keep. The computer keeps all the time for you. It's easier to administer accommodations for kids who have disabilities. You plug in a code and the machine does it for them. It's a lot of to like. So the test is shorter passages, less of a working memory load. You have more time per question, so it's less about speed, how fast you move. Your calculator's always there with less mental math issues, and you get your results back in days, not in weeks or months. And so we've seen the March and May test returns coming back in about 10 days or less. The scores are coming back, and that'll eventually get down even faster. We imagine a time it'll be less than a week, maybe even 2 or 3 days after you take it for the scores. Now the timeline, there are 4 timelines to consider as a sophomore. So the first option, say, you know what, I'm going paper all the way, which means I have to finish testing by December. That's okay. Kids have done Algebra 2, they're motivated, they want to be done. You're going to have an August test, you're going to have a October test, November, December. Get your 3 tests, at least 2 or 3, ideally we like 3, and then get them done, and you're finished December, you finish testing. That's one option. Option 2, the hybrid model. I may take 1 or 2 of these. I may take the November test, December test, I lock in a paper score, and then the digital comes. I could take it in March or in May or in June or in August or October. And so I do a combination hybrid model. Okay. Then option 3 is I look at this test. It's shorter, it's less speedy, shorter passages. I say, you know what, I'm going to go with that one, which means I'm going to delay testing until March. And so I have, March, May, June, August, October, November, December. There's 7 before I have to apply by the January deadlines. And for early, I still have March, May, June, and August to get my tests in. So that's fine. If you're in Algebra 2, this makes some sense. So you have a full semester under your belt. You can also use your PSAT to help gauge, how am I doing? Am I suited for this? And the other pathway is just take the ACT. And it's not changing in any meaningful way at this point. It does have some harder content, has a science section, pre-cal, but part of it is taking a dual baseline and figuring out, am I going to be better on the ACT or on the SAT? And for your class, the wrinkle is, am I going to be better on the ACT, the digital SAT, or the paper? And you could use your paper PSAT from sophomore year as a proxy for paper. You could use the October PSAT as a digital proxy, and then take a practice ACT and use those to see where am I in terms of my percentiles for my grade. And here are different timelines. So the first timeline is paper only. That's going to be doing some prep, maybe June, doing a paper test in August, digital PSAT in October, and then finish up with test 2 and 3 if needed, November, December. The other option is doing some fall prep and winter spring testing, where if needed, I go to the March digital test. And then the other option is pure digital, is I take my digital PSAT in October, and then I begin testing and hopefully finish, if needed, I finish in June with those digital tests. Those are the different timelines for your sophomore class. All right, now there are questions remaining of, will colleges superscore the tests? We do not know that. Different colleges will make different calls. And, oh, you're right. Okay, and so let me move forward just a little bit, a reminder on the timing. Now, we also have a digital SAT practice test, which you can take with Applerouth. We're actually giving it to students for free. You can email us info@Applerouth if you want to try our digital practice test with good feedback. Now, test optional admissions. It's the world, it's real. You have the option of sending scores or not sending scores. That is absolutely right. There are some perceived advantages. There are many schools who seem to, like and have a slight preference for kids who do submit test scores. UVA is actually even higher this year. It's over double kids getting in with test scores. Notre Dame, BC, Wellesley is almost double. Emory's double. Colgate's more than double. So kids are getting in at a higher rate. Now, this advantage isn't totally the test score made all the difference, because part of it is kids who submit test scores have high test scores. On average, kids who have high test scores also tend to have academically rigorous curricula and high GPAs. So, but we've talked to admissions counselors who say from the same high school, two kids apply, similar rigor, similar GPA. One kid sends a 34 ACT, one kid has no testing. That 34 is part of the conversation. And that 34 becomes, so it's weighted, but it's not all this difference. There's no way to tease that out. There are schools who require testing, and part of it is schools may announce over the summer that they're requiring testing, or after next cycle of admissions. Purdue just jumped back in the mix. We know Auburn just became conditional if you don't have a low GPA. Florida has always been, but Georgia, if you want to go Tech or the Bulldogs. Also MIT jumped back in the mix. They're required, and Georgetown jumped back in. So there's going to be a trickle of schools coming back in. It's not going to be a flood, but we're definitely, and it could be some of those state schools with those big differentials. It could be UVA, it could be Michigan, it could be other schools in the South. It could be, UNC teased it and then pulled it back, but they could jump back in. Or Texas at Austin and Maryland. We'll see what happens. And then some schools are conditional optional, where they encourage testing from all kids. But if you have under a 3.6, you're required to take it. Over a 3.6, it's optional. So we'll see more of this kind of conditional behavior going forward. Also, there are schools where merit-based aid is tied to testing. It's part of it. Alabama is one example of many, where if you get a certain threshold of test score and a certain GPA, they offer you more money. And that's something for people trying to finance college. My niece applied to Alabama, and she had a 1390. They offered her the UA Scholar, which brought tuition from $30,000 a year down to $6,000 a year. That was meaningful. She ended up going to South Carolina, but still it was a major thing looking at, I'm going to save $100,000 because of my test score. So Alabama stands out, but there are schools doing similar things. It's important you understand test optional does not mean test blind. They're very different things. People are going to get more clear because test optional, it could still be test preferential. It could be still, it can strengthen it. If I have good testing and good rigor, it's part of the conversation. And the question is, will the test score enhance or strengthen? Send it to schools where it helps and withhold it from schools where it's not competitive. And part of that is by their profile, by their mid 50 percentile, saying this, my score helps me here, hurts me here. And so look at your baseline scores to figure out, should I, invest in preparation and so forth. If you're close, you can consider, they want a 33, I have a 29, you're in the range. They want a 33, I have a 19. I probably am not going to be going the test prep route or the testing route for those kids. Also, do you want them to see it? Do you want the test to be part of the conversation? Or do you want to stand on the merits of your grades and rigor alone? And if those are just superlative and your testing is only mediocre, I wouldn't want to muddy the water. I want to keep keep it a pure conversation. I have amazing grades, amazing rigor, but average testing. But if testing can be strong, then that becomes part of the profile. Treat every school differently. There's no single way to do it. Natalie, we also have this coming up on May 18th.
Yeah, you have gotten through your slides. Well done, Chad.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a colleague who I think has summed it up quite beautifully, the test optional world, which makes it so hard for people to know what they should do. And the way that she describes it is, think about it as submit optional, right? Everything is submit optional in the college application process. Like, am I going to put that extracurricular on? Am I going to put that thing on? It's just one more thing that you decide, does this paint me in the light that I want this college to see me in, right? And that answer may be different by school. We're going to quickly drop a link down below, a quick poll. So please, it helps us to know who's here, because it helps us figure out what topics we should talk to you about, what is going to be most helpful to you. So please take a few minutes and answer that. It's only 4 questions, I promise. And then wanted to make sure that people know about this webinar tomorrow. It is at 12 Eastern and 9 Pacific, so it's going on during the day. But if you register and you aren't able to make it during the day, we will send you the recording. If you register, you will get the recording. It's going to be a great panel of mental health experts who specialize with teens, in working with teens, and just a conversation around how do we support our teens and tweens around issues of mental health. There will be strategies that work for parents, strategies that work for educators. We are kind of all in it together helping support these kids, and they need the help more than ever. And so it should be a good conversation. All right. Like I said, every student is different, and we do these things. As we talked about at the beginning, I'm going to get us right to the Q&A because I know we are running late here. And there have been lots of good questions submitted. Some of them were answered live, so good job, guys. And those we won't go over again. But Dana, this one is for you. We had a parent ask, or a student ask, how do you find internships or research programs?
So I do a lot of, like, at my school, I put together a Google Doc of, summer programs, internships, research, and I just do a lot of Googling to find them. The resources are out there. Mine tend to focus on the New York area because our students, if it's not an overnight program, it's a lot easier to be there. But you can kind of Google and see what sort of summer programs are available in your area. And like I said, cold emailing works. I mean, it is work too, because you get a lot of no's, but putting together a resume and a brief email introducing yourself. I do find with like college professors, if there's someone you really like, it actually helps to start with, I'm really interested in your research. I was wondering if I could talk to you about it for a couple of minutes. I have some questions, so that the ask is not, can I be in your lab tomorrow, but something smaller they can say yes to, and then you introduce yourself and you can help build a rapport with them before you make the larger ask.
Awesome, thanks. We had somebody ask, I'll take this one, are you going to share the PowerPoint? And the answer is yes. We will make sure that you get the recording and the deck both, so don't need to worry about that. And then Jed, this one is for you.
Yep.
Can you have the harder module on math and the easier module on reading? How does that work? And are the scores still out of 1600?
Scoring hasn't changed at all.
Yeah.
Each section's 800. And so, yeah, if you go easier, if you go the harder one on math, then you have a higher upper score threshold potential. And if you go on the lower module on verbal, you're capped at around a 660. In terms of that's, because you missed too many questions, and those, even on the current ST, if you miss 7 questions, you're not getting 700 in the current world or the future world. So that's just, you have a higher ceiling. And totally possible. Everyone is distinct. So you have baseline, adaptive, break, then your baseline adaptive, and you're done. So they're not connected or correlated. They're totally separate.
Awesome. All right. Dana. So this person says, my students counselor works with over 500 students. What are some resources to help us get ready for the process since our counselor isn't available for one-on-one meetings?
Right. So I think taking the process in your own hands and starting to visit to help the student understand what kinds of colleges are appropriate for them, and fit is a real thing. It's not just the rankings. It's where your student is going to be happy and thriving. And that can help you create your own list, and you can find online the averages of GPA and testing. Depending on the family's financial resources, there are private counselors. If your student goes to a private school like mine, I don't recommend spending money on a private counselor. That's part of what you're paying for in tuition. But where the college counselor is really, mostly doing paperwork, not getting to know the student, sometimes a private counselor can be helpful. And then also, the resources of the teachers in the school, the English teachers, the history teachers. A couple of people have asked, like, how do you find those internships, a research position? Sometimes the science teachers know. Sometimes they have connections. So utilizing the resources in the school can be helpful.
Great. Follow-up question also for you, but not totally the same topic. So this one made me giggle. We tried visiting a local college and the admissions office talked about students pursuing their passions. But the only thing my kid is passionate about is watching funny videos on TikTok. How is a 16-year-old supposed to know what they might want to study when they haven't really seen what's possible yet?
So I would say about that student, right? Like, what is it that they like about these videos on TikTok? Do they want to start their own TikTok channel? Like, I've had kids who are TikTok influencers and activists. And I don't know how funny the videos are, but they are utilizing this platform in a way that reaches people and is meaningful. And that student was very appealing to colleges when she applied. Is it that the student is interested in stand-up comedy? Well, maybe they want to take a class on comedy writing and try stand-up comedy, right? Like, what is it that they like about this, and how can they explore it in an active way instead of in a passive watching videos way? Maybe they like computer science and technology and they want to work on building their own app. So helping them think a little bit about what they like and then try it. I mean, sometimes students try an activity and they don't like that. And you know what? That's valuable information too.
Great. This one is interesting. I guess I'll throw this one out to either of you. So this is a student. They said, I've been looking at Ivy schools for the past year. I am Asian and I've heard that Ivy League schools have been taking fewer Asians the past few years. Most of my passion projects are based on my own identity, and basically I've been really anxious about it. Generally, do you have any advice?
So I have found that it's just harder to get into Ivy League schools in the last 5 years. I mean, I have these conversations with students where they're like, why didn't I get in? And I'm kind of thinking in my head, well, 5 years ago, you might have. And we don't have a large Asian population at our school. I work at a Jewish day school. So it is hard to get in. And I would encourage first and foremost for you to think about colleges other than Ivy League, right? Like, that's an athletic league and there are other amazing colleges, and to build your identity around only going to an Ivy League school, I think sells yourself short. You can go to a lot of really competitive, highly rejected colleges that aren't Ivy League and leave with great opportunities. But I also think that if you're leaning into your identity and you're doing interesting projects and exploring it in a different way, I think that's appealing to colleges, right? There probably aren't a ton of East Asian studies majors. And if you can genuinely present yourself as an East Asian studies major because you have been exploring your identity in different and unique ways, right? Maybe you pair it with anthropology, another small humanities major, but it's about studying culture. That's going to make you stand out in the pool in a different way.
Awesome. All right, Jed, we've got some questions around the test and testing. So I feel like some of these we've answered, but isn't the adaptive test going to put a lot of pressure on students to do well the first section? If they bomb the first few questions because of nerves, is a high score impossible?
So it's not item adaptive. That's like the GMAT, where for every item, like the first one, everyone informs the next question you get. If you miss 5 in a row, you're in trouble. Nothing happens until the entire section is complete. So until it's been 32 minutes, you can go back and forth, change all your answers, settle your nerves, calm yourself down. And so it really is not any more stressful, like, like it's a 30-minute section, like that's all you have for the ACT science, and for, the reading, it's half an hour. So that's the whole thing. So it's a full section. You got to calm yourself down. But it's not more pressure, because I feel like item adaptive is, but this is not that. This is section adaptive. So I feel like kids can ground themselves.
Right. And then Dana, this one's really about paying for college. So this attendee has asked, okay, can you explain in-state tuition versus out-of-state tuition for visa holders? So people who aren't citizens or green card holders.
So that is going to depend on the colleges. There are colleges that will give you in-state tuition if you are graduating from a high school within the state, regardless of your citizenship status, and you would pay in-state tuition. But you have to look at the tuition page of your state university and see whether you live within one of those states. I mean, in New York, you just have to go to high school in New York. So kids who live in New Jersey but go to school in New York, regardless of their citizenship status, pay in-state tuition.
Got it. That's cool.
That is cool. Jed, we have an attendee who wants to know, is a student going to know if they got to the easier or harder module? Is there color coding or anything?
The only way for certain you'll know if you went to the harder module is if you get a 670 or above, because that's the cap in the low end. But if you get like a 590, you have no idea. You could have went to the easy module and done pretty well, or gone to the hard one and done not as well. So under 660, you can't tell. But yeah, 700, you went to the harder module. That's the only tell you have. And there's no indication. They don't mark it. The colleges don't know. They don't give you on your score report. You have no idea. So that's just kind of, but the only tell is 670 above. Yeah, you made it in.
All right. And we've got people who want to know, there's a lot of research questions. So this one is pretty indicative of the sort, which is, how do you find out a college's most popular major?
Google. So some of it's reputation, and your guidance counselor is going to know, right? Like Carnegie Mellon's computer science is incredibly competitive, and colleges will tell you, U Chicago, economics, Johns Hopkins, biology. I mean, there are some that are just kind of well known, but you can Google these things and see how large each major is. Like WashU is a pre-med school, so a STEM program is going to be harder. Biology is going to be harder. And in general, biology is one of the hardest majors, economics. So I always encourage students to think about smaller majors within that field. If you want to study, you want to be a doctor, you want to study STEM, it doesn't have to be biology. It could be biochemistry, neuroscience. There are smaller sub majors, behavioral biology, public health, that lead kind of to the same place, and you can always switch when you're in college.
Great. All right, we have a question from a parent saying, basically, and I'm going to paraphrase it, that their student is very involved in one sport, and they've heard that like the Ivies are going to count that, or highly rejective colleges, I like how you put that, are going to count that as like one activity. And so the question is, how do they get like sort of enough activity without their child like not being able to sleep or doing other things, because they go really deep in their one thing?
Right. So if the student is not being recruited for the sport, I mean, if they're being recruited for the sport, then like by all means, focus just on that sport. I mean, colleges will see, right, that the student is doing 20 hours a week of soccer, and you're going to list it as more than one, because you're going to be on a travel team. You're going to do a summer program. You're probably coaching younger kids in soccer. It's not one activity on the list. And colleges do understand that when a student is dedicating that much time to that sport, then they're not going to be able to do 10 activities, right? 10 separate activities. Again, summer is a good time to broaden out, where you have a little bit more time. There may be some things where a student can do it on their own time. You could be a writer for the school paper. That's something that they can do on a weekend when they have an hour. They can work on an article. Community service that relates to the activity that they do, right? So maybe you're coaching at a Boys and Girls Club, and that is connected to soccer, but it's a different thing. It's community service.
All right. And our final question of the night, and I'll ask it to both of you. If you were on the other side of this webinar, if you were sitting there as a sophomore, rising junior, or the parent of one, what would you what would you ask, or what do you wish that person would ask? Like, what do you wish that these parents are thinking about right now, or these students?
So I kind of started by saying this, but I want to end by saying this. And I think that the student's passions and interests should drive the process for the student. Doesn't mean that there aren't strategies and some little games you can play to help position yourself in the best light. But don't start with what you think colleges want. Start with what your student actually loves and is good at. And if they don't love something, pushing them to be involved in 10 activities that relate to it, or taking the hardest level classes in a subject matter that just does not fit their intellectual interests and strengths, is not good for anyone. And it's ultimately not good for the process. But really, that last slide you had about student mental health, right? Like, I noticed that students are much more anxious now than I remember being in high school, and I remember my friends being. And I think some of that is this pressure to not be yourself, but to be someone else. And I have to do 10 things to get into college, and they're not the things I like. So letting your student drive the process and letting them actually take the time over the next year and over the summer to discover what it is they enjoy, and we're going from there, as opposed to working backwards from, what does my kid have to do to get into this school?
And
For
Jed?
me, I think I look at having a student, getting a sense of like calibrating themselves, their abilities, and like looking at these schools in an honest way to really appraise where I'm a fit, as Dana mentioned, at all the different pieces in terms of where I'm scoring on testing, my grades, my rigor, all the, like really considering that. And then, like in terms of, do I want to prep really hard? Like looking at in advance, that calibration is really meaningful. I feel like that's helpful, trying to inform which test, and doing practice tests, getting more information, and also looking very closely at the schools you may be looking at in terms of what they want, and where does this fit, where does it help me, where is it worth it, where's not worth it, and doing some of that thinking on the earlier side to help figure out how you spend your time and resources and energies, make sure it all makes sense going forward.
All right, well, thank you all, and thank you all for joining us tonight. I wish that we could have had time to answer every single question live. We've got them, and where we can, we'll try to follow up with the answers later. I can't answer everything, particularly the ones that are asked anonymously. But I just so appreciate Dana and Jed, your time tonight and your expertise. And I know it was valuable for me, and hopefully it was valuable for our audience as well. So thank you all.
All right, Shel. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Night.